I don't know about you guys, but I feel like this year has absolutely flown by because summer is already right around the corner, which for a lot of us means warmer weather, more outdoor activities, spending more time in the sun, and also more ways that you can be left feeling dehydrated. Now, summer requires extraordinary hydration that's built for everyday dehydrating moments, but luckily, Liquid IV hydrates you with benefits like electrolytes, essential vitamins, and clinically tested nutrients. Liquid IV has 3 times the electrolytes than the leading sports drink, plus 8 vitamins and nutrients in a single stick. So it really is no question why Liquid IV is the #1 powdered hydration brand in America. Liquid IV makes it simple. You just tear open the stick, pour it into your water, and enjoy your packet of Liquid IV. Liquid IV is my go-to when I want a little pick-me-up, when I feel like my body needs that extra boost of hydration. Drinking regular water day in and day out, it honestly can get a little bit boring, and Liquid IV makes hydrating a more fun experience. Whether you're on the go traveling, you're laying by the beach, you're finishing a workout, or you need an extra boost after a fun night, Liquid IV has got you covered. Tear, pour, and live more. 1 stick and 16 ounces of water hydrates you better than water alone. And now, Liquid IV has sugar-free flavors too. So whether you want white peach, raspberry melon, lemon lime, or my personal favorite, which is green grape, you are sure to find something that you'll love. Turn your ordinary water into an extraordinary hydration with Liquid IV. Get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you go to liquidiv.com and use the code KILLER at checkout. That's 20% off your first order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code KILLER at liquidiv.com. Hello everyone, what is up? Welcome back to another episode of Killer Instinct, you guys. Thank you so much for joining me here today. If you're new here, hi, my name is Savannah and I am your host of Killer Instinct. Before we get started, make sure you go ahead and hit that subscribe button, that way you never miss an episode. We post weekly here on the podcast every single Wednesday and you are not going to want to miss it. We also upload the video version onto YouTube on Wednesdays as well, so make sure you are subscribed. Now, you guys, as you can tell by the title of today's episode, today we have a wild one. As I've mentioned before, we have dedicated the month of May to family annihilator cases, and this one definitely fits that category. Today we are talking about the tragic case of the Amato family. I'm very curious to hear what you guys have to say about it. It has a lot of twists and turns, and it was also one that was very highly requested by you guys once I announced May's category. So I'm very interested to hear your thoughts about everything. But with that being said, let's jump right on into it today. So when talking about the Amato family, we have mom and dad, Chad and Margaret, as well as their 2 sons, Cody and Grant. Now, Cody was the older brother by 2 years. He was 31 years old, and Grant was the youngest at 29. Now, Margaret also had another son named Jason from a previous marriage, and Chad adopted Jason when he was only 3 years old. So even though Jason was not biologically Chad's son, Chad still treated him as if he was. The family grew up in Chuliota, Florida, which is a rural community outside of Seminole County. Now, Margaret, the mother, was known to be a loving and caring woman. She wanted the best for her kids, and she was very hands-on. It was said that she had unconditional love for her kids and was selfless through and through. She was described as the type of person that would give you the shirt off of her back if you needed it. And outside of the unconditional love that she had for her family, Margaret had that same unconditional love for animals. She was very passionate about animals, specifically horses. She had spent a lot of time rescuing and rehabilitating horses at the stables that were nearby the home. She was very passionate about being a caretaker. Now, Chad, on the other hand, the father, he was the provider of the family. He worked in the medical field and wanted to do all that he could to set his family up for success. Now, Chad was described as someone who was very structured, he was very regimented, and some would say controlling. He was very type A. He always had a plan for himself, his family, and his kids. Chad did have certain expectations that he wanted his children to meet. He had certain expectations of what he wanted his family to look like and be perceived as on the outside. died. And according to his youngest son, Grant, some of those expectations were very unrealistic and too hard to reach. Now, the Amato household in and of itself was described as one that was very, very dark. Windows would be covered with tinfoil or pieces of cardboard paper, and this was definitely not a house that people would come and gather to and socialize at. It was described as being somewhat of a cocoon for the family that blocked out the outside world. Now, Jason, the eldest son, he had moved out of the home once he reached a certain age. He wanted to start his own life. He wanted to make his own name for himself, and this was something that he really, really was passionate about. It was important for him to be able to start a new chapter outside of his family home. But interestingly enough, the other sons, Cody and Grant, they did not have that same desire. They were not worried about moving out. Cody was 31 and Grant was 29 years old, and they were still living at home. And this was not a case of two men who didn't have jobs, they weren't unemployed, they didn't have, a great future set out for themselves. Both of the men had jobs, they were making decent money, definitely enough to afford being able to move out. And again, right now we're looking at the 2018-2019 time frame. So they were making enough money to be able to move out on their own. However, according to Grant, the idea of moving out never really came up for neither him nor his brother. It wasn't really something that was ever talked about. It wasn't something that they were really concerned about ever. And Grant said a lot of that had to do with his father. His father was very protective and he wanted to keep Cody and Grant very close by. And according to Grant, he claimed that a big reason for not moving out was partially because of his father, Chad. He claimed that Chad was very protective of him and Cody and wanted to keep them close. So you combine that with the fact that both of the men were living at home completely free of charge. They didn't have to pay rent. They didn't have to pay any bills. They really weren't paying anything to live at home, which was a big incentive of living at home. They didn't have to worry about monthly payments or anything like that. So because of all of those things, they just never had that desire to move out. Now, Cody and Grant, the brothers, the middle brother and the youngest brother, they were very, very close. They did absolutely everything together, so much so that the relationship that Cody and Grant had definitely came off as a little bit bizarre. And a reason for that, just to give you a little bit of an idea, a reason for that is because Grant described Cody as being the love of his life. That is how he described his brother. He claimed that Cody was the person that was always there for him, the one that he could always turn to no matter what. He knew that Cody would have his back and vice versa. They were very much attached at the hip and all of their goals were the same. They wanted the same things out of life. They even wanted to pass away at the same time. That way they would never have to be without one another. They went to the same high school, which was Timber Creek High School. They both joined the weightlifting team together. And a direct quote from Grant was, quote, "I always thought that Cody would be my significant other, so to speak, where no matter where we went, we would always be together and do everything together." End quote. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea of the relationship that these two brothers had with each other. And when it comes to Cody, every single person who knew Cody described him as quite literally an angel on earth. Everyone loved him. Everyone wanted to be around him. He was a great friend. He was said to be a model citizen. No one had a bad word to say about Cody. And then when looking at Grant, no one really had anything bad to say about Grant either, but they definitely saw him more so as Cody's shadow. The two were definitely a duo. Like I said, they did everything together. Everyone knew them as Cody and Grant. If one was there, the other one was going to be there. Now, when talking about Cody and Grant's business and career and professional lives, both Chad and Margaret wanted their sons to be successful. Chad and Margaret were both in the medical field field already and encouraged both Cody and Grant to do the same. So because of this, both boys applied to nurse anesthesia school at the University of Central Florida. They both got accepted, and they were both working on their career goals together, and the future looked very bright for the two of them. Both of them were extremely excited that they were going to the same school. They were working towards the same goals. It perfectly aligned with what they've always wanted. Now, something did end up happening that really put a wrench into these plans in 2018, and this happened after Grant got into an argument with another nurse about administering an epidural on a female patient. It's not really clear what the details of this argument were. However, we do know the result of this argument, which was that Grant was kicked out. And after Grant got kicked out of this nursing program, this was the beginning of the unraveling of Cody and Grant's almost parallel lives. Grant did admit to feeling some resentment towards Cody at this time because he felt like Cody wasn't accurately defending him like he wanted him to. Grant really wanted Cody to get all of the other students to rally around him and defend him against what was going on, but Cody didn't do that, and Grant couldn't fathom the fact that Cody was just simply moving on as if nothing happened. Now, for Cody, this was definitely feeling for him as if he was in between a rock and a hard place. He was looking at his brother, who he cared about very much and wanted him to succeed. They had always had these big dreams of doing every single thing together, but now things had turned sideways, and Cody was faced with the decision on whether or not to move forward, which he ultimately decided to do for the sake of his own future. And that really crushed Grant. Now, Grant was able to continue working as a nurse. He was just kicked out of that specific program. He ended up getting a job at Advent Health in Orlando, Florida, but not long after this, in June 2018 as well, police were contacted after it was suspected that Grant had been stealing medication from the hospital that he was working at. Now, the medication was propofol, and propofol is an anesthetic drug that's used to help relax you or to use for moderate sedation. It makes you sleepy, and it was assumed that Grant was stealing this medication for his own personal use. However, after speaking to Grant, police realized that that was not what was happening at all, but in fact, Grant was stealing the propofol medication to use to administer to different patients who did not need it. So he was improperly administering this medication, and the hospital staff figured it out because they found 8 empty vials of this specific medication. And Grant told police that he didn't have any ill intent in giving the patients this medicine, but he thought that he was actually doing them a favor. Grant often worked night shifts at this specific facility, and he felt like the patients weren't able to properly relax, so he improperly administered this medication to them without them necessarily needing it or without it really being on their chart at all. Now, obviously, this is a big no-no. You don't do that. So because of this, Grant got fired from this job, and he also got arrested for this. However, the charges were eventually dropped, but regardless, Grant really felt like this was the end of his nursing career. You had this along with the fact that he got kicked out of the nurse anesthesia program that he was previously in with Cody, and he really felt like his future in the medical field was no longer. Any hopes that he had on finding another job in nursing were basically scratched off because of this record that he now had. And so now everything that he had known, everything that he had previously worked on was now gone, and he felt very lost in the world. He felt like he had no purpose. He saw Cody, who was excelling and he was moving on in his life, and he was again succeeding in the nursing program, and Grant looked at himself and saw everything that was crumbling down, and it made Grant feel like he didn't have a solid path, because everything that was happening that they wanted to happen for the both of them was now really only happening for Cody, and it made Grant feel, again, very, very lost. Now, because Grant was not going to school anymore, he was unemployed, he didn't have a job, Grant had a lot of free time. And so he turned to a new passion of his, which was video games. Even before being fired as a nurse, Grant always loved video games. And after he got fired, he would spend about 16 hours every single day playing these games. And because he was playing them so frequently, Grant decided that he wanted to see if there was a way that he could monetize this, if there was a way that he could get compensation from these video games. And he soon realized that there was, and that was by getting involved in a streaming service that a lot of you guys may know of, which is called Twitch. Now, if you don't know, Twitch is a streaming service where people can stream themselves playing games, people can send donations to your streams, sometimes there will be ads running through streams, so people are making money a variety of different ways on the platform. Now, for Grant, he really wasn't making that much money off of it, or not nearly as much as he would have liked to. Grant was making about $150 a month in total on Twitch, so he wasn't making too much money. However, it's not like he had any bills to pay. He was still living at home, rent-free, bill-free, so that $150 really was just going straight to Grant at that point. Now, while Grant was getting really involved in the Twitch scene, playing a lot of video games, he also spent a lot of time browsing the internet and came across several different cam girl websites. Now, if you do not know, for the most part, and I am not the most knowledgeable about this, so if I mess up a little bit or if I don't explain it all the way correctly, I apologize. Cam girls perform on a variety of different websites. They're cam girl websites, and they will perform erotic shows on these cam sites, and the people who watch these shows, they'll join, they'll watch, they'll tip the models, and viewers also have the opportunity to pay more if they want private time with the specific model that they're talking to. So these cam girls do have the opportunity to make a lot of money based off of the audience that's watching them. Now, with Grant in particular, when he was going on these sites, like I said, he was at a point in his life where he was lost. He didn't feel like he had a solid path. His self-esteem had plummeted. But when he went on these sites, he was almost able to create an alter ego for himself. He created an account where he called himself Deus Light. It's not exactly clear why he chose that username, but that is the name that he went with. And according to Grant, he claimed that the digital version of himself was a mix of not only him, but also his brother Cody. He claimed that he used his brother's success paired with his own social ability. He presented himself as this hotshot guy who drove a nice car. He was very successful. He was a nurse anesthesiologist, which we all know now he was very much not. So Grant explores these sites and he creates this alter ego for himself, essentially catfishing, if you will. However, he's using his own pictures, but he very much is amplifying and exaggerating and flat out lying about who he is. Now, while exploring these sites, Grant came across a cam girl model named Sylvie. Sylvie was a Bulgarian webcam model. She became very, very successful and was one of the top creators on this particular website. So she was making a good amount of money doing what she was doing. Now, when Grant saw her, it was pretty much game over for him. He spent all day and all night either watching Sylvie or talking to her. He would pay for private sessions with her, but they also spent time messaging with each other. Grant said that there were times where they would talk on the phone together for up to 4 hours at a time. And just to give you a little bit of an idea and some context for how much Grant was paying, when it comes to these cam girl sites, or at least the ones that Grant was using, you would pay by tokens, and you pay a certain number of tokens per minute to either watch the cam girl or talk to her. And Grant would buy up to 5,000 tokens at a time, which equated to about $600. Sylvie's show in particular costed 90 tokens per minute. So again, you can do the math there to think about how much and the quantity of tokens that not only Grant, but anyone would be purchasing at a time. Grant would also send Sylvie gifts. He sent her lingerie and sex toys. And you might be wondering, where was Grant getting all of this money to do this? Because it's not like he was making a surplus of amount of money from Twitch, or certainly not enough to cover all of this. Well, Grant Grant was using his family's credit cards to send Sylvie this money. And according to Grant, he told his family he was using the credit cards and the money was going to advance his Twitch career. So he lied to his family about where the money he was using was going. And according to Grant, he claimed that watching Sylvie's shows, it almost became kind of this competitive game because he wanted to be the biggest tipper on Sylvie's streams, because there would be a visual chart of who was the biggest tippers on these screens. And Grant said that when he got to that number one spot, he wanted to almost make his claim. He wanted to show everyone that he was the biggest tipper, that he could send Sylvie all this money. You know, Sylvie would give him shout outs during the stream, or shout outs to the biggest tipper, which Grant would always try to be. So there was a certain level of attention and what Grant felt to be respect that came along with being the biggest tipper on these screens. And Grant wanted everyone to know, like I said, that he was tipping the most. And at a certain point, Grant claimed that he was spending about $10,000 to $15,000 a day watching these streams. And again, this is all on his family's credit card. And with these cam girls, and with Grant and Sylvie in particular, it was really hard for Grant to distinguish between what was real and what was fantasy. And again, that is a big struggle, and one of the dangers of these cam girl sites is because the lines get blurred. There is a very big gray area because for Grant, he felt like he was truly forming a romantic relationship with Sylvie. But for Sylvie, she felt like she was just doing her job. And again, that's one of the dangers of doing this on both sides. It's dangerous for the cam girl because she could get roped into an obsession, and it's dangerous for the viewer because they become obsessed and needy and have a hard time distinguishing between fantasy and reality. And a lot of times these cam models will create a very personal experience for their viewers, you know, to attract more people, to make more money. It's a business to them. But again, the lines get blurred because the people watching sometimes don't understand that. They don't get that it's just a business, but there are still those personal relationships being formed. It's a part of it. Now, again, while all of this was happening, tensions were very much rising in the Amato family because Chad and Margaret are watching their credit card bills skyrocket, and they're telling Grant that he needs to get a new job. He needs to not spend all of his time on the computers. But at this point, it was very clear that Grant had developed an addiction. He spent all of his time at his computer that by the time he stepped away from it, he was just itching to get back. He can never be fully present with anyone in person. It was very clear that he just wanted to get back to these cam girl sites, to get back to talking to Sylvie. So again, it really created a lot of tension between him and his family because they felt like there was a disconnect, like something wasn't making sense. Now, in December of 2018, the family thought that maybe there was a glimmer of hope because during this time, Cody, Grant, and another friend of theirs visited Japan. They took a trip to go to Japan, and Cody and Grant's parents thought that this would be a great thing for Grant. They thought that this would be perfect to get him out of this funk that he was in, which again, no one really knew the behind the scenes of what was happening with Grant at the time. So everyone just thought he was in this depression. He was in this funk. He didn't know what was going to, transpire in his life. He felt lost. So they thought that this would be the perfect way to kind of get him out of his shell, get him out of his bubble. Maybe a change of scenery would give him a new perspective. And the reason they chose Japan was because Grant and Cody loved anime, and it was always a trip that they wanted to go on together. Now, Cody financed the entire trip. He paid for everything for Grant and never asked for anything in return. All Cody and his parents wanted was to see Grant happy and the hopes that maybe it would set him back up on the right track. But honestly, it almost did the opposite because when it came for the trip to come to an end, it almost sent Grant into a depression. Grant was having an amazing time on the trip. He was thriving. He was having a blast with his brother and his friend. That was until the last day of the trip rolled around, which was on December 15th, and Grant just up and left. He walked off by himself and no one could find him. And when Cody noticed this, he began to panic, obviously, because no one had seen Grant. No one knew where he went. They're in Japan. This is not somewhere where Cody very much knows his way around. However, luckily, Cody was able to finally track Grant down. And upon doing so, Cody and Grant finally had a sit-down conversation together for an hour and a half. And this is where Grant confessed everything to Cody about what was going on with Sylvie. I don't know about you guys, but I feel like this year has absolutely flown by because summer is already right around the corner, which for a lot of us means warmer weather, more outdoor activities, spending more time in the sun, and also more ways that you can be left feeling dehydrated. Now, summer requires extraordinary hydration that's built for everyday dehydrating moments, but luckily, Liquid IV hydrates you with benefits like electrolytes, essential vitamins, and clinically tested nutrients. Liquid IV has 3 times the electrolytes than the leading sports drink, plus 8 vitamins and nutrients in a single stick. So it really is no question why Liquid IV is the #1 powdered hydration brand in America. Liquid IV makes it simple. You just tear open the stick, pour it into your water, and enjoy your packet of Liquid IV. Liquid IV is my go-to when I want a little pick-me-up, when I feel like my body needs that extra boost of hydration. Drinking regular water day in and day out, it honestly can get a little bit boring, and Liquid IV makes hydrating a more fun experience. Whether you're on the go traveling, you're laying by the beach, you're finishing a workout, or you need an extra boost after a fun night, Liquid IV has got you covered. Tear, pour, and live more. 1 stick and 16 ounces of water hydrates you better than water alone. And now, Liquid IV has sugar-free flavors too. So whether you want white peach, raspberry melon, lemon lime, or my personal favorite, which is green grape, you are sure to find something that you'll love. Turn your ordinary water into an extraordinary hydration with Liquid IV. Get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you go to liquidiv.com and use the code KILLER at checkout. That's 20% off your first order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code KILLER at liquidiv.com. Cody and Grant finally had a sit-down conversation together for an hour and a half, and this is where Grant confessed everything to Cody about what was going on with Sylvie. Grant told him everything, told him how much him and Sylvie had been talking, told him how much he had been spending on Sylvie. And in this moment, Cody felt a lot of sympathy for Grant. He felt like Grant was definitely going through something that Cody didn't necessarily know how to help him navigate. Again, their lives had been parallel up until nursing school, up until about 8 months prior to this, and Cody felt bad for his brother. And so because of this, Cody ended up giving Grant $7,000 to help him fund his tokens for Sylvie. Now, this was obviously a very, very generous gift that Cody gave his brother. But once they got back to Florida, Cody ended up confiding in their father about what had really been going on with Grant. And he did so out of love. He felt like Grant was going down a slippery path and he was looking for guidance from his father as to how to help him. Now, once Chad learned about how much money Grant was spending on Sylvie, how much money of Chad's that Grant was spending on Sylvie, because again, this wasn't Grant's money that he was throwing away, it was his family's. Now, when Chad learned about this, this created a very hostile environment for everyone in the house. Chad yelled at Grant about this. There was a big argument over this, so much so that Grant decided to leave the house. He got into his car and drove over to his aunt's house, and along the way there, he stopped in a parking lot to send a video to his brother Cody. Now, the video that was sent, it's very unnerving, it is disturbing, and in these videos, Grant is asking for $50,000 from Cody because he had already spent the $7,000. And Grant says that the $50,000 is going to be used for him to fly to Bulgaria to meet Sylvie. Because again, in Grant's mind, he has created a personal, romantic boyfriend-girlfriend relationship with Sylvie. Now, when Cody saw these videos, he was very concerned and did not send Grant the money. He showed Chad and Margaret what his brother was sending him. And so they they all decided collectively that they were going to get in the car, drive over to the aunt's house, which is where Grant was. And upon doing so, Grant walked out of the home, and that is when he learned that he was being taken to rehab. His family said that they were taking Grant to rehab for a porn addiction as well as an internet addiction. Now, Grant said that he remained quiet while he got in the car with the rest of his family. However, as they began the drive, Grant did admit to having somewhat of a freak out. He started screaming. However, it was very brief, and then he ultimately remained quiet the rest of the way until they arrived at the rehab. Now, the rehab center was for 60 days, and while Grant was there, he was not supposed to have access to any internet or really have any way to contact anyone via social media outside of the rehab center. Now, it was in the first few days that Grant was at rehab that Chad actually reached out to Sylvie himself. So Grant's dad reaches out to Sylvie basically to address everything that had been going on. He reached out to Sylvie and told her that Grant was not this hotshot guy that he was pretending to be, because like I said, this entire time, Grant is pretending that he's this super wealthy man who has this very luxurious life, and that is what Sylvie is believing. But Chad breaks that barrier very quickly. He bursts that bubble very quick because he tells Sylvie that not only does Grant still live at home, he doesn't pay any of his own bills, he doesn't have a job, and all of the money that Sylvie got sent was stolen from his parents and his brother. And all in all, collectively, it was counted that Grant spent over $200,000 of his family's money, and that was only over a period of several months. Now, when Sylvie heard this, she reached out to Grant directly, and she basically banned Grant from re-entering the chat room, from watching any of her shows ever again. But you might be sitting here wondering, you might be sitting here saying, well, Savannah, he's in rehab. How is he going to have access to talking to Sylvie? How is Sylvie able to reach out to him? Well, that is because, according to Grant, his mom, Margaret, smuggled her phone into the rehab to give to Grant. That way he could continue talking to her. I don't know how she was able to do this. I don't know how this happened without getting caught. I don't know why anyone thought this was a good idea. All I can imagine is that Margaret did this because she cared about her son and she loved her son, and she felt like she was also in between a rock and a hard place, and she wanted to help Grant however she knew how, and maybe Grant said something to her. I don't know why this phone was allowed into the rehab, but that is how Grant was able to continue talking to Sylvie while he was in there. And somehow, along with that, not only was Grant able to talk to Sylvie, he was able to convince his parents to pick him up from rehab and take him back home. Now, Grant was only there, like I said, it was supposed to be 60 days, but by the time he was picked up, it had only been a few days to a little over a week that he had been at rehab. But when it came to his parents' approach on how to navigate Grant, Chad and Margaret had two very different approaches. Like I said, Margaret was very compassionate. She wanted to help her son. She loved her son. Both of his parents loved him immensely, and that's why they were trying to get him help. However, their ways of doing that were different, because when it came to Chad, Chad was very much laying down the law at this point. When they went to go pick Grant up, Chad was absolutely fed up with how Grant was acting, and Chad gave Grant an ultimatum. Chad gave Grant a list of things that were going to change. This included that his family was not going to pay for any current, remaining, or future debts that Grant may have. His car was being taken away. All electronics were going to be monitored. He wasn't going to have a key to the house. There was going to be no weapons in the house. There was just a lot of restrictions. And again, Grant is 29 years old, and now he has all of these rules. His dad is enforcing all of these different policies onto him. They did give him the option of moving out. However, Grant would not be able to afford it. So now his only option is living at home. Now, the biggest thing that was on this ultimatum list was that Grant was no longer allowed to speak to Sylvie. He was not to communicate or contact her ever again. And if he did, Chad said that he would be kicked out of the house and banned from the family forever. So this now brings us to January 25th, 2019. And on this specific day, there was a coworker of Cody's who called 911 and asked police to do a welfare check on Cody after he failed to show up for work that day. Now, police headed over to the Amato house at 9:17 a.m. They tried multiple different times in different ways to get inside of the residence, and ultimately they were able to do so by getting through the side door. And when they did, the first thing that police saw was Cody lying in the doorway between the home gym and the garage. Cody was laying in what was described as a semi-fetal position. He was in his nursing scrubs, and it appeared that he had been shot below the eye. Now, a few feet away from Cody's body was also a handgun. Now, police continued walking through the home, and when they did, the next body that they came across was Chad. Chad was lying face up in the kitchen, and he had been shot twice, once in the back of the head and once in his back. Now then, as police continued, they found Margaret, who was in her office, slumped over her desk, and she had been shot twice in the back of the head as well. So with this, police have now discovered 3 out of the 4 family members who lived in that house, which led police to the question, where was Grant? Now, after canvassing the home, police confirmed that Grant was not inside, but his car was also not in the driveway. Police put out a bulletin for Grant's 1996 Honda Accord, and the next day, on January 26th, the car was spotted at a DoubleTree hotel, and ultimately, police found Grant in the hotel room, where they then asked him to come down to the station with them so he could answer some questions. Now, initially, Grant was very laid back in his demeanor. When he was sitting down with police, he talked about his own personal life, his personal interests. He talked about his love for video games. He opened up about Sylvie. But the one thing that Grant never asked police was why he was there or what was happening. That question never came out of Grant's mouth. Grant was interviewed for 3 hours before police were actually the ones that had to bring it up. And when they did, Grant immediately denied having any involvement in anything that happened to his family. He said he had nothing to do with it. He claimed that he didn't know who would do this to his family, but it was definitely not him. Now, according to Grant, he said that his version of events, which starting on January 24th, so the day before the bodies were discovered, on January 24th, Grant said that he had been home all day preparing for a job interview. He claimed that Chad, his father, had gotten home from work that afternoon and became very confrontational when he found out that Grant had still been talking to Sylvie. Now, as we know, one of the big ultimatums on Chad's original list was for Grant and Sylvie to have no contact. So Grant claimed that when his dad found out that they were still in communication, Chad grabbed Grant by his shirt and told him to get out of the house. Grant said he then packed a bag of his belongings and then was walking out of the house, but him and his dad had a second conversation, and this one was not as heated nor confrontational, and it actually ended with Chad giving Grant his credit card for Grant to use for a hotel for that night. Now, while they were talking in the driveway, Grant and Chad, Grant claims that Cody then came home from work as well. The two briefly spoke, and then according to Grant, Cody told him not to worry because Cody was going to quote unquote deal with it. Now, Grant said that he then said goodbye to Cody and his mom before getting into his car and driving to the local Publix, where he was there using the free Wi-Fi before he ultimately went to the hotel later that night. Now, when police heard this, they did not believe it for a single second. They did not believe that Chad, who had been so adamant that Grant and Sylvie no longer speak, that he actually came up with a list of ultimatums that Grant was made to follow, that the same guy would give his son a credit card to go use at a hotel and to get ultimately more tokens, because that's obviously what Grant was going to do. They did not think that that was going to happen. They also did not believe that Cody was going to quote quote unquote deal with things, because that's the picture that Grant was trying to paint. He felt like if anyone did this, it must have been Cody, and it must have been a murder-suicide. That is the picture that Grant was now trying to paint. The brother that Grant cared so much about that he even went to the lengths of calling him his significant other, that same brother, Grant was now throwing under the bus for the murder of his parents. Now, right from the get-go, police theorized that Grant murdered his entire family. They believe that an argument ensued, and that led to Grant murdering his brother, father, and mom. Police believe that Margaret was the first person killed because she was sitting at her desk. That's where her body was found. And then Chad was the second person killed, and ultimately Cody. Police believe that Grant tried to set this up as a murder-suicide by placing a handgun near Cody's body. And they were also able to figure out that while Grant was at the Publix using the local Wi-Fi, he was logging in to Cody's checking account and using that checking account to buy more tokens to talk to Sylvie. Now, Grant was ultimately arrested and charged for this. However, he pled not guilty, and the trial began on July 15th, 2019. During the trial, the prosecution argued that Grant was responsible for all three murders and that he tried to stage it as a murder-suicide. It was believed that the crime scene was staged to look like Cody had killed his family and not Grant. When police found Cody's body, like I mentioned, there was a gun lying next to him. However, ballistics of that gun did not match the bullets that were used in the murder of the family. So the bullets were not the same. Now, during this trial, Margaret's oldest son, Jason, so that is Grant and Cody's half-brother, he did testify, and he testified for the prosecution. Now, during his testimony, Jason claimed that while Grant was initially being interrogated by police after they found him at the hotel, they did call Jason in, and Jason had a chance to speak with Grant. Jason claimed that he walked into the room and asked if Grant had anything to do with it, which Grant adamantly denied. However, Jason did not believe his brother. It was also during the trial that Jason told the courtroom that he still loved his brother. Now, during the trial, it was brought up that 2 days prior to the murders, on January 22nd, Grant had written a letter to the other members of Sylvie's chat room, the other members that watched Sylvie. Grant wrote this letter to them, and the letter said, quote, "Hey guys, the purpose of this letter is an apology. With each of you, I forged a different form of friendship. I think it's safe to say that everyone here knows that I have made a drastic mistake with Sylvie. I lied to her and you guys from the beginning about myself. I can simply plead that I was human and made a terrible error and hurt the ones I grew to care for. Don't lose her. I hope I can be with her again. I hope that I can be a part of that community again. And I'm sorry for what I did to her and you." End quote. So this letter, which is very cryptic and a little bit vague, was also brought up in the trial, and the prosecution used this to allude to the fact that Grant was somewhat already admitting guilt to something. He seemed that he was going to be doing something that he was trying to gain sympathy for, he was trying to apologize for. So this letter was also brought up in the trial. Now, as far as the murder weapon went, the murder weapon was never discovered, and still to this day has never been discovered. Forensics showed that the bullets came from a gun called an IWI Jericho 9mm 941. Now, when police searched the home, they did not find this gun. However, a month before the trial began, there was a friend of Grant's named Blake who claimed that he believed that Grant could have stolen this gun from him. Blake claims that he did own this specific type of firearm, and that one day Grant came over to his house, and it's possible that Grant stole the gun from him. Blake claimed that he didn't know that the gun was missing until after news of the murders had broke, and he had never seen it again since. Now, Grant did not testify during his trial, and the defense basically argued that there was not enough physical evidence to prove that Grant was responsible for these murders. They were dismissed in an afternoon and then came back that very evening with a verdict. When the jury came back, they found Grant Amato guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Now, the death penalty was on the table for Grant. However, the jury decided against it, and a lot of people believe believe that a contributing factor to this was when Jason, Grant's own brother, claimed that he still loved Grant. That was a big thing that was talked about in the trial. Now, in August of 2019, Grant did try to appeal his convictions. However, the appeal was denied in 2021. He is currently serving a life sentence at Took Correctional Institution. And to this day, Grant claims that he is innocent and he is not the one that murdered his family. So to this day, he has never admitted any sort of guilt to these murders, to these crimes. And you might also be sitting here wondering, where is Sylvie? Now, Sylvie has never spoken out publicly in regards to this case. She has never talked to any journalist about this case. There have been many people who have tried to get in contact with her in regards to this case. However, she has not ever spoken out about it. So as far as like a public statement, what she thinks about it, what her thoughts are, she has never come out with anything. No one has ever been able to get any sort of comment or any sort of communication with her. So no one really knows whatever happened to Sylvie or what her thoughts are about all of this. But that, you guys, is the case today. That is the murder of the Amato family. It's tragic. It's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to see a family who rallied so hard behind one of their own. It seemed like everyone in that family did everything that they could to try and help Grant. They might have enabled him along the way, obviously by giving him more money, giving him the phone, but it was all out of pure love. They all wanted to help him. They all felt sorry for him. And in return, they're all brutally murdered. And it's just a really, really sad and unfortunate, tragic, heartbreaking case. Looking at Grant, who spent hundreds of thousands of dollars of his family's money and in turn turns around and murders them, is absolutely, it's insane to me to think about. It's insane that someone can take such deep advantage of their family and then turn around and kill them. It is absolutely crazy, but I'm very curious to hear what you guys have to say about this one. So with that being said, you guys, that is all for me today. Thank you guys so much for tuning into another episode of Killer Instinct. Again, if you're new here, hi, my name is Savannah and I'm your host of Killer Instinct. Again, make sure you go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. We post every single Wednesday on the podcast as well as on YouTube, and you're not going to want to miss it. I'll be back next week with a brand new one for you guys, and until then, stay safe. Bye, guys.